Let's rewind to a year that most history books just, kind of reduce to a depressing footnote. 1933. The Dust Bowl was literally choking the plains. Bank doors were nailed shut, like physically nailed shut. But here's the crazy part. Amidst all that rubble of a completely collapsed society, some people didn't just survive the Great Depression. They actually thrived. And no, it wasn't because they were lucky, and it definitely wasn't because they had some secret stash of hidden wealth. They thrived because they operated with a raw, totally unfiltered approach to making literally something out of nothing. So in this explainer, we're going to unpack the architecture of that survival. We're looking at 20 brutally honest lessons from 1933, built on a concept I call desperate ingenuity. And as we'll see, this forgotten blueprint is absolutely crucial for us as we look ahead to 2026.
To really grasp the stakes here, you have to completely internalize this number, 25%. In 1933, a quarter of the American workforce had zero income. I mean, literally zero. Try to imagine that today. There were absolutely no safety nets, no unemployment insurance, no food stamps, no stimulus checks arriving in the mail, and of course, no digital gig economy to just fall back on. It was a brutal, completely unforgiving sink-or-swim reality. If you didn't figure out a way to generate value that day, you simply didn't eat that night.
Okay, let's dive right into this. When you look back at the raw reality of 1933, you can almost physically feel the desperation. But here is the absolute secret of the survivors. They didn't just stand around in those massive lines waiting for a rescue that, let's face it, was never coming. When the macro-economy completely burned to the ground, they just started picking up the pieces and building micro-economies right out of the rubble. They literally created value out of thin air.
And that brings us to our core definition, desperate ingenuity. It's exactly what it sounds like, a raw, unfiltered approach to making something out of nothing when traditional systems just totally collapse. At the center of this survival strategy were three specific microeconomics, or what I like to call the three engines of desperate ingenuity. These aren't just, quaint historical footnotes to feel good about. They're living, breathing blueprints that are going to anchor our first three really profound lessons today.
Lesson 1, the Firewood Arbitrage. What's really fascinating about this one is just its sheer brilliant simplicity. So in 1933, coal was heavily rationed, right? And electricity, well, that was an absolute luxury. But trees were everywhere. Survivors took idle, dead wood and turned it into an immediate, highly tradable asset. This was the physical economy of warmth. They didn't sit around waiting for a market to magically appear. They literally grabbed an axe and built one. The major takeaway for us today? You absolutely must identify your own standing timber. Like what unused skills, spare time, or dormant networks do you have sitting around right now that someone else desperately needs?
Moving on to lesson 2, door-to-door soap sales. This perfectly represents the economy of dignity. Think about it. When the banks failed, pride got very, very heavy for people. Men and women literally knocked on doors selling handmade bars of soap for pennies. Why soap of all things? Well, because soap is intimate. It allows you to wash your face, clean up, and actually face the world the next day with your head held high. They weren't just selling lather, they were selling relief from shame. The big lesson here is that solving an emotional fracture, especially something like the fear of losing your dignity, is and always will be completely recession-proof.
And this brilliantly illustrates our third lesson, roadside biscuit commerce. Survivors would prep their dough in advance, bake in super rapid batches, and literally just set up a cast iron skillet right at busy intersections. They didn't need some perfect, polished storefront. They just needed to place themselves exactly where human movement met human hunger. This is the economy of momentum. Speed, agility, and positioning are always going to be waiting for perfect conditions. Actually, if you think about it, it's the exact same logic behind today's hyper-local pop-up economies.
All right, so we've seen the three main engines. Now we're going to shift gears a bit. I'm going to take you through a rapid-fire masterclass of the remaining 17 rules of resilience. These are the brutally honest, ground-level tactics that actually kept families breathing, categorized by the core themes of survival. Let's hit it.
First up is community and barter. Lesson 4, barter networks. We're talking literal service swaps, like trading a dental filling for a bushel of apples. Lesson 5, multi-generational bunkers. This proved that isolation was a luxury the poor simply couldn't afford, so families just merged to split the crushing friction of rent. Lesson 6 is the borrowed egg trust economy, followed closely by Lesson 7, the neighborhood tab. In both of these, your reputation was your literal credit score. If people didn't trust you, you were out of luck. And Lesson 8, community intelligence. This was crowdsourced survival, where just knowing who was hiring for the day or who had cheap grain was the ultimate currency. Social capital became literal, tangible capital. And honestly, we're seeing this replicated right now with modern digital barter networks.
Next, let's look at frugality and resourcefulness. Lesson 9 is treating waste as a resource, literally cinder sifting through your neighbor's ashes to find unburned coal. Lesson 10 was the absolute golden rule: repair, reuse, reimagine. You patch something until it completely disintegrated. Lesson 11, the lard and flour diet, proved that in a true crisis, sheer caloric density completely beats nutritional purity. So yeah, definitely not a keto-friendly approach. Lesson 12 was urban sharecropping, where manicured flower beds were immediately ripped up and turned into potato fields. And Lesson 13, scarcity innovation. Constraint absolutely breeds creativity. Notice that this kind of frugality wasn't just about sad deprivation. It was about extreme, almost aggressive creativity. It's basically the grandfather of today's zero waste and micro-homesteading movements.
Moving on to labor and income. Relying on a single income stream in 1933? Absolute death wish. Lesson 14, mobile labor. You had to hit the road and physically chase the market pulse. Lesson 15 is skill hoarding, where being a generalist totally beat being a specialist. The guy who could fix a broken tractor, butcher a hog, and mend a fence, that guy never starved. Lesson 16 was the side hustle stack. Survivors would layer multiple low-status jobs to create a sort of diversified portfolio approach to their survival. And Lesson 17 was embracing the gray market economy, doing whatever it took, totally outside formal regulations just to keep the lights on.
Wrapping up the list with mindset and resilience. Lesson 18 is a massive flashing warning light for us today. Debt is a trap. Avoid it at all costs. Survivors knew debt was an anchor tied to your ankle when the waters inevitably rise. Lesson 19 was strategic silence. Listen, if you had a chicken, you didn't let the neighborhood see the feathers. You kept your head down. And finally, Lesson 20, the psychology of small wins. This highlights the mental armor required to just stave off total hopelessness. Keeping your worn-out shoes polished or your one good shirt clean, that wasn't vanity. That was a daily, vital act of defiance against total despair.
Now, I really want you to stop and ask yourself this. Are you surviving in pay periods, or are you surviving in seasons? Because if you take all 20 of those desperate ingenuity lessons we just covered and try to jam them into a modern 2-week pay cycle, you're gonna fail. The survivors of the Depression made it through because they underwent a profound, fundamental paradigm shift in how they viewed time and resources.
So, the absolutely crucial point here is understanding what I call the philosophy of friction. Think about it. Our modern society optimizes entirely for smoothness, right? One-click delivery, direct deposit, instant gratification. But the survivors of the 1930s, they designed their entire lives for friction. They expected resistance. They built their routines around the core assumption that things would be harder, take much longer, and cost way more energy than they ever hoped. And here's the magic of that. When you expect friction, you actually stop panicking when the system inevitably breaks down, and you just start preparing.
Just think about our temporal architecture for a second. The modern pay period mindset is incredibly dangerously fragile. It just assumes continuous employment, perfectly stable prices, and absolute predictability. You budget for that next check, and if it's delayed by even 2 days, total panic sets in. Contrast that with the season mindset. This is true resilience. It honors the honest ecological rhythm of reality. Winter comes, crops fail, supplies run low, and then, eventually, spring thaws. Depression survivors didn't wake up asking, when is my next check clearing? They asked, okay, what's coming next season? They meticulously prepared for winter, and then they rested when there was abundance.
Let's move to how this builds into an actionable plan for today. How exactly do we apply the seasonal mindset in 2026, especially in our crazy, highly inflationary environment? First, map your friction points. Literally write down where your income tends to stall and where your expenses always spike. Second, build seasonal reserves. And I don't just mean cash under the mattress. I mean deep reserves of skills, tools, and real community trust. You gotta trade your obsession with ROI, return on investment, for ROR, return on resilience. And third, align your rhythms with reality. We need to stop forcing our lives into a fragile corporate calendar and start breathing with the actual economic cycles happening all around us.
I want this quote to really truly sink in. Depressions don't kill the prepared, they reveal them. History's absolute worst economic disaster acted as the ultimate unforgiving filter. It filtered out the isolated, the arrogant, and the inflexible. But it deeply and generously rewarded the adaptable. It rewarded the people who were willing to check their pride at the door, embrace the friction, and just do the dirty, gritty work of survival.
Which leaves us with one final provocative question that I want you to really chew on.
What is your standing timber? Seriously, what are the hidden assets, the dormant skills, the completely untapped relationships sitting in your life right now? Look, don't wait for permission to use them. Don't sit around waiting for the economy to miraculously smooth out. Start building your microsystems today. Trade in trust, align yourself with reality, and start thinking in seasons instead of paychecks. Because at the end of the day, the system won't save you, but your desperate ingenuity absolutely will.